Welcome to Healing the Spirit, a space where we awaken our creativity, deepen our connections, and remember who we are through the lens of astrology, archetypes, and art making. I'm your host, Jonathan Coe. Hello everyone, welcome to Healing the Spirit, and welcome to December. In this episode, I'll be sharing some thoughts and contemplations based on the astrology of the month, and then we'll be deepening into the specifics of the transits as well as the cards that I pulled to provide guidance for us. The main theme for December 2024 is melting the ice, revealing the inner fire. When I tune into the overall energy of the month, I receive this imagery of an ice statue that's melting away, and inside it there's a flame. The flame feels steady, quiet, small, a little bit unbothered even. Meanwhile, the melting of the ice feels ferocious, and it feels like it happens in multiple iterations. So the process for the coming month centers around answering the question of what matters to us, around touching in with the inquiry of, does this actually matter to me? And if not, what actually matters instead of the thing that I'm holding on to? And if it does matter to me, why? What about it feels important? It feels to me like the answers to these questions will be constantly revealed through the release of everything else that isn't part of that core self. As I touched into the theme and the imagery of the month, I felt a considerable sense of melancholy and grief coming up. This is a month that activates the emotional body, and these emotional experiences feel like they point to places within ourselves that perhaps we've been locking up for some time as part of a defense mechanism. These are the places where we've been gripping very tightly because we believe that otherwise we will be falling apart or we won't be able to hold it together. And the invitation for December is to create pockets of slowing down, of gently recalibrating back to our sense of self, to our perception of what's real and what matters, and back into what's really in front of us. The month invites us to get even more present than living one day at a time. It feels to me like a mantra that would be more helpful to settle into at this point is one moment at a time. Every single conversation we have, every single interaction, every little task within the larger project of our lives, our existence, there's an invitation here to really call back our attention and to check in with ourselves, to check in with our hearts, our bodies, our minds, our spirits, and to really listen and to really follow what is coming up in that moment. This moment by moment awareness to me feels deeply tied to our sense of core self, right? Usually that sense of core self isn't one that we can narrow down into a title or even like a series of, here are the things that I do, right? But rather it's an experience, right? Our core self is really an experience of deep presence. Recently, I had a conversation with a student about how when we feel unable to touch into that core of self, it's usually because we're fighting some core truth of our experience. When we fight to be further ahead than where we are on our path, when we wish our relationships or our loved ones would respond differently to our desire for connection, when we wish that a creative endeavor is more successful or more easeful or maybe bring us more acclaim or financial reward, we are simultaneously denying a core part of our current reality, right? That's not to say that the wish itself that there's anything wrong with the wish itself, but rather that when we are so focused on wishing things to be different, we're missing the wisdom that's inherently present in that moment, right? That denial creates a filter that can make it so challenging for us to access a deep knowing or our intuition, our wisdom, that is always kind of bubbling forth out of us, right, at any given moment. And in this instance, with the student I was having a conversation with, our conversation revolved around how there can be a sense of visceral relief that comes with acknowledging precisely where we are at the moment. That befriending the moment we're currently in, even if it doesn't totally match up with our expectations, gives us space to breathe, right? Gives us space to allow creativity to move through us, because true creativity is really about not fantasizing, right, outside of what we're currently moving through, but looking within in those crucial moments, right? We were also talking about how relinquishing our grip, our clinging to an idea of who we need to be, where we need to be, can create the opportunity for us to truly embrace and accept the gifts that are always present for us every step of the way. So this is making me think about the idea of dreaming big and visioning long term, right? This may be a theme that is really present for us as we're approaching the end of the year. And it makes me think about how often as a culture, we have created all these different frameworks and techniques to be able to access our long-term vision, but we often forget to watch our posture when we're doing so, right? And I mean that energetically. I also mean that literally and physically. When I hear someone discussing a 5-year plan or a 10-year plan, often what I observe energetically is either this person ends up leaving their body into some mental construct that they've conjured up for themselves, or on the other extreme, they are trying to prove themselves by setting a goal to heal their own past trauma, right? Parts of them that maybe weren't able to get their needs met in the past. So I think long-term visions are beautiful. They're necessary, they're extremely powerful, and they give us a direction to move towards, right? However, when it's being used as a strategy to kind of avoid the pain of the present moment, to distract ourselves from the initial discomfort that can arise at first, at least with full presence, it becomes a distortion. It becomes yet another coping strategy rather than a tool that can propel us forward by paradoxically helping us surrender more deeply into the process, right? When we plan, actually, if we do it skillfully, the planning helps us relax into the reality that the process will never look like what we envision it to be, right? And therefore improves or recovers our ability to collaborate and to co-create with the deeper intelligence of the path itself. Now, this process of defrosting, of thawing, may bring up a lot of emotions. And sometimes when emotions surface, fear can come up too. So this is a reminder that when fear comes up, to not necessarily interpret them as inherently a reflection of our current state of safety, but rather perhaps some of these fears are tied to what the emotions made us feel in the past, right? When we recognize this, there's choice around how to respond to the fear. We can either view the fear as a sign that pain is coming or danger is coming, Or we can see it as a sign that something is really melting away here. Something is finally allowing itself to be witnessed by us. Something is releasing, and in its place, we get to weave new stories. We get to weave new ways of being that are more reflective of where we currently are, that honors our present moment capacity. There's also a relational piece for December that is calling us to cultivate and to be more mindful around how everybody is on their own journey, right? And to create space for that difference. We're being called to embody a candle in the dark, to become a guiding point for other people as they move through their own process of death and transformation on a deeper internal energetic level, and to help them trust more deeply in that process, which can sometimes feel confusing and disorienting. On a daily basis, similar to the invitation for the self, there's a call here to create space so that we're not in a reactive place, right? To practice maximum compassion for ourselves and for others by not making assumptions about where other people are coming from, right? When something charged comes up in conversations or in interactions, noticing that the intensity is rising, right? And then checking in with ourselves. Do I have the capacity to have this conversation right now? And checking in with the other person. Do they have the capacity to engage? And sometimes the answer is to be really wise about it. And sometimes that wisdom can look like agreeing to disagree for this moment and then discussing later when we have more space for it. The reality is that none of us really know where other people are coming from, even when it's someone very close to us. Or maybe especially when it's someone super close to us, right? I'm continually astonished in my own life by what I learn from other people about their internal reality when I ask them clarifying questions. Like, I would hear a dear friend or my partner say something and I'm like, are you saying what I think you're saying? And sometimes when we really take the time to check in, others can really show us some super surprising aspects of their perspective and their reality that we may be really learning from. Right? We may end up learning from other people's perception of life if we are open to it. And sometimes that openness comes from allowing ourselves to ask these questions. We can also create space by resourcing ourselves to minimize our own urgency and our own reactivity. Asking yourself, am I hungry? Am I angry? Am I lonely? Am I tired? Right? And just checking in, like, where am I, right? How resourced do I feel right now? What resources do I need? And kind of doing that continually, not forgetting to breathe, not rushing the process, right? And finally, readjusting our own self-perception. This is something that I was teaching my students in Shapeshifting Academy, which was a container I recently facilitated. And I was constantly surprised by this practice myself. It feels to me like for so many of us, we derive our own self-perception from the world around us, from society, from our family of origin, from our workplace, right? From things like how much money are we making from this specific project. And to me, this practice is deeply resourcing because when we readjust our own self-perception, asking ourselves, who am I in this present moment? What feels true to me? This is a question I used to ask all my first-time guests on the podcast. And as I'm saying this, I'm realizing this is a practice I need to bring back because it's such a generative practice, right? Oftentimes when we take the time to ask ourselves and to ask other people who they feel themselves to be, we're often surprised because we really are a fractal of the divine. We really are a part of this large web of existence, and taking the time to ask ourselves who we know ourselves to be in the present moment is such a recentering question to me. The last thing that I want to share here is to remember that everything is a bid for connections, right? We as humans are really geared towards desiring, yearning for connections with one another, with ourselves, with the world around us. And as we move through the process of defrosting, of melting away these ways of being, these ways of thinking that are maybe not helpful for us, we can come across patterns of thinking or relating that feel really misaligned. And when we come across these patterns, it's easy to feel a lot of guilt or a lot of shame, or even blaming ourselves or other people for having learned these ways of being that are ultimately not optimal, right? But recognizing that even our misguided expressions or places where maybe we've missed the mark, when we bring awareness to it, recognizing that they also are part of our lived experience, and they speak to a deeper and very true desire for love and connection, is so helpful in helping us foster deeper compassion for ourselves and ultimately for the world around us. Remembering that winter solstice is both a time of maximum darkness, of the longest night, and it also reminds us that light is returning. All right, so now let's move on to the astrology. We begin the month with a new moon in Sagittarius ruled by Jupiter, which is currently retrograde in Gemini, and opposing Mercury, which is also retrograde in Sagittarius, its ruler. Jupiter is also squaring Saturn and trining Chiron. So the start of the month with this new moon in Sagittarius feels unstable to me. It feels like there are big ideas at play, and we are looking at structures created out of belief systems that may have been totally out of alignment with who we are in this moment on a spirit level. We may be asked to look at familiar situations and to notice that there are parts of our responses that are completely different than the last time this situation appears on our doorstep. This may be a slightly lousy new moon for creating something concrete or tangible. Organizing may feel quite challenging, and at the same time, it's a fabulous new moon for seeding some intentions around how you want this cycle to feel. So my recommendation here, if you would like to really get into your desire and to tap into what you want to create at the beginning of the month, is to focus your attention and your energy on how you want to feel rather than getting too bogged down about the details. Now, a little caveat here is that when we focus on how we feel, we're also well aware that how we feel is fleeting, right? Our emotions shift with us all the time, right? Our emotions are like the moon. It ebbs and tides, right? And so trusting that the emotion itself doesn't have to be fixed, but rather we can tap into states of being that in a way maximize our chance of experiencing those emotions, right? It really does come down to our preferences. And when we choose how we want to feel, walking and living in our reality, then reality also starts to co-create that sensation and that state of being with us. This may be a great time to widen our perspective, especially with Venus still being in Capricorn at the start of the month. You may want to focus on things that you deeply care about, maybe a specific topic of research or a creative modality or a relationship that you would like to deepen. And then spend a little bit of time with other people who have completely different perspectives than what feels natural to you. This act of almost like playing devil's advocate feels really accessible to me at the start of the month. For example, maybe you, or I'll speak from the I here, I'm committing to start the month exploring the works of astrologers who practice different techniques and operate from different frameworks, different cosmologies than I do. And doing something like that to me feels like it can be really assistive in broadening our perspective, in broadening how we see the world, so to speak. And this feels like the time to pull away from trying to get very bogged down in how to find the answer or what exactly is the answer, right? Within the first week of the month, we also have Mars going retrograde in Leo and Venus entering Aquarius. To me, some of you may have heard me say this before, but Mars and Venus very much guides the visceral sensation that we experience. Mars and Venus are both extremely corporeal, right? Like they're really rooted in the body. And so the shift as Mars goes retrograde and Venus moves into a different sign may feel like a pretty noticeable aesthetic difference, even though we are still continuing on some of the themes that we've been exploring. So when Mars was direct in Leo and Venus was in Capricorn, the energy feels more like looking down at our papers and really working things out diligently, right? But once Mars goes retrograde and Venus goes into Aquarius, this feels more like review time for me. Creatively, this may be a time where we want to consider bringing out some aspects of our creation and sharing it with others, sharing it with the world so that we can see how others interact with our ideas. Relationally, this feels like reviewing what we've been moving through the past month or so, and then really asking the question of, is this trajectory good? Does this feel joyful? Does this feel life-giving? Does this feel sustainable? Aquarius as an air sign is much more cognitive, much more mental and linguistic compared to Capricorn. So there can be a need here to talk things out, to process things verbally, to consider where other people are coming from. This transit feels very creative to me. There's a lot of potential, and the feel of it feels, the energy feels a bit more detached than when Venus was in Capricorn. So it's less of a worker vibe and more like a manager vibe, right? I also say that this feels like a great time for me to do a little bit of a review of the past year. We'll discuss this a little bit more when we get to the tarot portion. In the middle of the month, we have the full moon in Gemini on the 15th, I believe. And on the same day, we also have Mercury going direct. Now, when Mercury goes direct, it moves extremely slowly, right? So the energy here for this full moon also feel extremely scattered to me. And in that scattering, there are new ideas and perspectives coming through, but my advice would be to either just take that into account as information or to create small experiments that basically wouldn't really hurt either way, right? This is not the time to make huge moves, right? To me, this is about being deliberate, steady, letting ourselves explore some of the more novel possibilities, right? And I would also recommend grounding this full moon with doing something that's quite practical. So, for example, what you might want to do, given the placements of the planets, might be something like going back into the vault of old ideas maybe, or old projects, and spending a little bit of time journaling about your experience, looking at some of these ideas, right? Revisiting them, and maybe even developing them a little bit further with intention, but without pressure, right? Or kind of big expectations. You might even learn something new and interesting about yourself through the process. Between the full moon and the end of the month, which is also the end of the year, of course, we have the winter solstice where the sun enters Capricorn, and then on the 24th, we have Jupiter squaring Saturn. Now, this feels kind of like a biggie. I would even say this is one of the more significant astrological events of the year. The first of these Jupiter squaring Saturn situation happened in August 19th, 2024, earlier this year. And then we'll have the third of these squares in June 2025. But the third one will happen in a different sign. It will happen in Cancer and Aries, which will feel completely different, and it will also bring up very different thematics. So again, in this Jupiter squaring Saturn situationship, right? Jupiter, which is currently retrograde in Gemini, ruled by Mercury in Sagittarius, plays a significant role here, right? Because that Jupiter also rules Saturn in Pisces, right? So what's coming up for me here is that change is imminent. And many of us are already feeling this, that especially with these two signs being in mutable signs, that change is inevitable. There's no question anymore that change is necessary. The evidence for that is abundant, right? But we also may not have all the information to make sustainable, healthy, positive change. And that can be such an extremely frustrating experience, right? Of, I know something needs to change, maybe on a personal level or on a societal level, but I have no idea what that's going to look like. And to me, this is the challenge of the specific transit. Thinking about Jupiter squaring Saturn, right? This is about the principle of expansion and growth and abundance butting up against structures, against prior expectations, against tradition, right? And so looking at places in our lives where there are restrictions and where there's also an opportunity for growth, but maybe there's an additional element of not quite yet, right? Not quite yet. And sitting with the discomfort of that and recognizing that that will be part of the experience, right? That this larger change actually requires us to transform on a deeper level. And part of why the change feels so slow is because our internal change is also quite slow. And having compassion around that while continuing to engage and to move forward, right? To be open to the change, to release that which is no longer resonating with us. Finally, the month will end with a new moon in Capricorn, which again activates that Saturn in Pisces ruled by Jupiter in Gemini, right? So hopefully you start to see a pattern here. This is what I was talking about earlier when I received that image of the ice, right? That's kind of being chiseled, that is being slowly defrosted layer by layer. There's a quality to this month that feels cyclical, that feels spiralic, And it can bring up frustration, it can bring up fear, it can really take us on this roller coaster of emotion. And to me, the new moon in Capricorn, though, provides a slightly different bent to it, right? This is a fabulous time to ask ourselves, what do I want to build in my life, in my reality? What do I want to create for my community? What kind of experiences do I want to share with people? What kind of world do I want to live in? And to hold that intention in your heart as you dissolve into the coming year. And trusting that staying present with the complexity of your experience, the complexity of your emotions, will help you really get in touch with that inner flame. So I'll finish off with sharing with you the tarot cards that I pulled. So as I was shuffling and pulling the cards, I felt a sense of tentativeness, of doubt, of questioning. And I don't always interpret what I'm feeling or my personal experience when I'm pulling the cards, but this one felt like it really wanted to be part of the reading. So I just want to affirm that there's something about the month that felt like a little uneasy to me. Like there is something about like, ooh, I want to move forward, but I'm not really sure how to do that. And the cards that I pulled are Six of Pentacles, which in this deck is also associated with success. That's the keyword. And with Moon in Taurus. And then I pulled the Eight of Swords, which is associated with the keyword interference and with the astrological Jupiter in Gemini. And then I also pulled the Moon. So I pulled Six of Pentacles, Eight of Swords, and the Moon. To me, these cards are quite literal. We are, if we look at it from a tarot perspective, we are wrapping up the strength year, right? This is a great time for us to look at where we've been stretching ourselves, where we've been taking ourselves further than we thought we wanted to, right? What was really hard for you at the start of the year that's no longer challenging at this moment? What were you really scared of doing or saying or being, but now you look back and you're like, oh, I can do this like, just like clicking my finger, right? Or snapping my finger. Like it feels so easy now. So this idea of like looking at success and then interference and then finally kind of letting the moon alchemize it all makes me think about going back to the intentions at the start of the year. I really want to encourage you to, if you set some intentions, look at your journal, right? Check out maybe the readings or the guidance that you received at the start of the year and your reflections around it. And you may also want to look at pictures or photos, or maybe even what music you were listening to at the time, what movies were you watching at the time, because there's something here to me that really invites us to reconnect with this part of ourselves and to take the time to recognize where we've succeeded, especially with intentions or with goals that take a long time or feel challenging, that took numerous attempts, that felt hard or confusing. And also to notice which intentions and which goals you had to set aside, right? Undoubtedly, we create intentions or we set goals that we ended up being too distracted by other things that are more pressing, right? Or we simply didn't have time for it. We had zero energy. Maybe the motivation kind of evaporated. So consider if some of these are still meaningful and important for you, and see if you can create space for them, even if it seems minimal, right? Maybe your intention is to learn a new language. Can you bring that into your day-to-day reality throughout the month of December to kind of help you bridge between the end of this Gregorian calendar year into the next? And finally, with the moon, bring your attention to what still feels puzzling, right? What still doesn't make sense to you? What still feels impossible even? Are there certain goals or intentions that you look at and you're like, I still have no idea how to make that a reality, right? And then give yourself permission to surrender that to a higher power, to recognize that part of making certain things part of your reality can go beyond just approaching things from a logical place, right? The moon is such an invitation to welcome in the unexpected, the unseen, the parts of us and parts of our lived experience that don't totally make sense to us. Finally, I also pulled an oracle card. This is from the Dragon Mother Oracle, and the card that I pulled was the Dream card. And immediately I felt this warm, inviting feeling, like solace in the woods. And by the way, this deck is created by someone named Sadie Webb, and it's an absolutely gorgeous deck. So in the accompanying book, she said something to the effect of how this Dream card is about a reminder and an invitation to work more intentionally with the dream world, to consider dreams as invitations and communications with the unseen world rather than just psychological. Dreams can help us access both mystery and freedom, right? And there's actually something very similar in the Moon card, right? There's something about finding freedom in the mystery and enjoying the mystery of freedom. So as we're wrapping up the month with that new moon in Capricorn, I invite us to really embrace our dreams and embrace the mystery and the freedom that comes with embracing the mystery of our dreams. All right. Thank you so much. I hope that this has been helpful to you. I would love to receive your review. It's so helpful for podcasts to receive reviews. It really helps get the word out there. So if you're listening on Apple Podcast, dropping a review would be super appreciated. And same thing if you listen on Spotify. I would really love to receive any comments or to hear more about your experience with this particular transmission. And as always, I invite you to come back to this as you are moving through the month. It's really wild to me each time I come back to these monthly episodes, how much there is that ends up being illuminated for us, right? And we hear information from a completely different place. So if that resonates and if that feels exciting, I welcome you to do that. All right. Thank you so much. I hope you have a beautiful December, and I will see you again very soon. Take care.